Hey, what's going on everybody? It's ETA Prime back here again. Today we're going to be putting together a super cheap Linux gaming PC. Now usually when I do builds like this, we just go ahead and install Windows because it's actually a lot easier for most people to do. But ever since the Steam Deck hit the market, there's been lots of talks about gaming and Linux. I've done a couple videos so far, and in this video I'm going to show you how to get everything up and running. I'm going to show you a few tweaks, how to update your GPU drivers, install a couple useful applications, and get Proton working with Steam and Linux. And the rig I'm going to be putting together in this video cost me a total of $267. There is a chance you could get out cheaper if you can find a cheaper GPU or a good deal on Craigslist for the Optiplex itself. Because for the base of this unit, we're going to be using a trusty old Optiplex 720. You can find these really cheap online. I picked mine up on eBay. It's got a 500 gigabyte Western Digital Blue drive, 12 gigabytes of RAM. I know it's a little odd, but we've got two 4 gig sticks and two 2 gig sticks. And for the CPU, this is using the i7-4790. That's the exact one I wanted. You can get the i5 versions, but this will perform better. The GPU I'm going to go with in this rig is an OEM RX 480. These are usually pulled from HP systems. We've got 4 gigabytes of VRAM. It's definitely an older card, being an RX 480, but I think we're going to get some decent performance in Linux pairing it up with this older i7. GPU prices are coming down, so there's a chance you could find something with a little more power that you could throw in here, but this RX 480 didn't cost me too much. It was still a little overpriced for really what it is, but all in all, I'm out around $267 for this unit, including a 240 gigabyte SSD, because we don't want to use that 500 gigabyte drive that came with the unit. So I've installed my SSD. I had another little bracket laying around. I've just mounted it in here. And this unit didn't come with an extra SATA cable, but most of them do. So just keep that in mind. You can always use the included drive, which is a 500 gigabyte drive, as a storage drive for your games. But we're going to be running Linux from this 240 gigabyte SSD. And for this, we're going to be installing Manjaro. So I've got my drive taken care of. RAM and CPUs already installed because this basically came as a plug-and-play system with Windows installed on that 500 gigabyte drive. I would highly recommend replacing the thermal paste on the CPU cooler, but I've tested Windows on this already and it's not overheating. Next thing I need to do is pop my GPU in here, a Radeon RX 480. It's an OEM variant with 4 gigabytes of VRAM. Now this does require a 6-pin connector, and unfortunately, this Optiplex 720 doesn't have one. It does have a 290 watt power supply, and in order to get power to this card, I did have to pick up an adapter. Dual SATA to 6-pin, this should power the card pretty well. It's definitely not the best option, but when we're working with used parts here, I'm really not going to complain. Now we need to get Manjaro installed on the SSD, and I'm going to show you how to do that. You will need a USB drive for this to work, 8 gigs on up, and another PC. It'll work with Mac, Linux, or Windows. In order to get Manjaro flashed to our USB drive so we can install it on our PC, we'll need to download an application to allow us to flash that image. Personally, I use Etcher, works for Linux, Mac, or Windows. Go ahead and download it here. You can choose your version. Once we have that, we need to download Manjaro. Links for these will be in the description. There's a couple different versions you can download, and really this is just the desktop interface. We have XFCE, Plasma, which is the one I personally use. I just think it looks really good. Or you can choose GNOME. It's really up to you, but I'm going to be using the Plasma version, so that's the one I'm going to download. Now that we've got Etcher and Manjaro downloaded, we're going to open up Etcher, choose Flash from File. We're going to find the Manjaro version that we downloaded. Select Target. This is going to be my USB drive, and as you can see, this might show extra drives, so just be careful with it or unplug extra drives. I'm going to go with my SanDisk, which is just a 32 gigabyte USB drive. Just be careful because it will show all attached drives. Choose Select and Flash. Once this is finished, we can take our USB stick over to the PC we want to install it on. I've inserted the USB stick into one of the free USB ports on this PC, and while it's booting, I'm going to go to the boot menu by pressing F12. This is how you get there on these Optiplexes, but if you're using a different system from a different manufacturer, that hotkey might be different. I'm going to choose my USB drive. We're going to boot Manjaro with open source drivers. This is going to run it live from the USB stick. And you can try the operating system out right now from the USB drive without installing it, but we want to go up to the top left-hand corner and install Manjaro. It's going to give us a nice little walkthrough. I'm connected over Ethernet, so it will check for updates. If you're not online, you will have to skip that part. But we're going to choose next, choose our location, our keyboard layout, which drive we want to install Manjaro to, and I only have that one 240 gigabyte drive installed. We're going to set up a name. We're going to set up a password. You can log in automatically. You can use that same password as root if you want to. I wouldn't suggest it, but for this video, I'm just going to go through the prompts here. And on the next page, it's going to give us a little rundown on everything we chose. So we've got our keyboard layout, our locale, where it's going to be installed to, and I'm just going to click install. It'll go through everything for us, and once it's done, it'll ask you to reboot the system. Alright, so now that you have Manjaro installed on your PC, you'll notice that Steam is already installed. We're good to go there, but there are a few settings we need to change to get Proton working, or to get games that are only compatible with Windows to work in Linux. There's a couple other little things I'd like to show you, like updating your GPU driver and installing an awesome performance overlay to work with all of your games, so we can monitor the frame rate, GPU, and CPU usage. I'm going to go ahead and swap over to my game captures so we can get a better look at everything. Okay, so the very first thing I like to do is just make sure my GPU drivers are up to date. They usually are with Manjaro, but I always like to check it. Down here in the bottom left-hand corner, our app drawer, we're going to search for hardware, hardware configuration, and from here, you'll see our Video Linux, open source is installed, but we can always auto-install open source driver, choose yes, put your password in that you created when you installed Manjaro. Mine was already installed, so it really didn't have to do anything, but if there's an update, it'll go ahead and do it for you. So we've got the GPU drivers fully up to date, and like I mentioned, Steam does come pre-installed. I've already logged in, downloaded a few games, but if we go to my library here, you'll see if I choose a game, like Project Cars 2, there's no way to play it right now, and that's because we don't have Proton enabled. So in order to enable Proton in Steam, we're going to go to Steam, Settings, Steam Play, enable Steam Play for supported titles, and I also do it for all other titles. That way we can play a lot more games over here. And there's a Proton version. I go with experimental. You can pick and choose what you'd like. Experimental is kind of the way I always go. And you can always check the Proton database online just to see what works better with what game. But experimental has been really good, and that's what I stick with. We're going to choose OK. We'll have to restart Steam. And now that we've enabled Proton, if I go back to my library, Project Cars 2, we can play it. It'll say install if you don't already have it installed. But now all of my titles are able to start up in Linux. Now there will be a few games that just don't start up great with Linux, but everything here actually does work pretty decently. So we've got that taken care of. We can actually start playing games right now, but I like to monitor what's going on with my PC, so I'm going to show you a really awesome application. Now in Steam, you can always enable the overlay there to show your FPS, but if we head down here to the Add and Remove software, we're going to download two applications. One's known as MangoHUD. This will give us all the information displayed on screen while we're playing a game. CPU clocks, GPU clocks, temperature, everything like that, kind of like MSI Afterburner. And we're also going to install something called Go Overlay to configure it easily. And I found the easiest way to install both of these apps is to use the AUR. Once you get Manjaro up and running, you won't be able to find the AURs from the Software Center here. But if we go to the hamburger menu, Preferences, put our password in, Third party, you can enable AUR support. So I've got this checked. I also keep build packages and check for updates. You can just check this first one if you want to. Once that's done, we can search for AUR packages and it'll easily install it. It has an AUR helper built into Manjaro, so we don't have to do really any configuration except for that. From the search menu, first thing we're going to install is MangoHUD. I've got mine installed. Just go ahead and install this. Once you have that taken care of, I would highly recommend downloading Go Overlay. This application will show up in our application menu and we can configure MangoHUD basically however we'd like. So install this one also. Once both of those are done, we can head to our application menu, Games, and we're going to start up Go Overlay. And this is exactly how mine's going to look while I'm playing a game. Gives me my FPS, I've got my system RAM, I've got my VRAM, CPU usage, GPU usage. You can rename everything. You can make it look however you'd like. Go to Visual, Metrics, and from here we can set up GPU temperature, click Save, give me a little graph up here. It's really up to you. You can always rename your GPU and CPU from here. This does come in really handy just to let you know exactly what's going on with your system while you're gaming. And in order for this to work with all of your games, choose Global Enable. You will have to reboot your system, but then we don't have to do any extra setup. Once we start up a game, we'll get this overlay on top of the game so we can see what's going on. There are other applications that I usually use with my main system, but for this video here, we're just going to focus on what we've done. Now it's time to game. And the first one here is Project Cars 2, 1080p with a high-medium mix. I should have just left it at high. I really wasn't expecting it to perform this well on the RX 480. I got an average of 96 FPS out of this game. Really great performance, and yeah, most definitely we could go to high with this on all settings at 1080p. I've actually had really good luck with this game in Linux in the past. There's no native Linux version, so we're using Proton right now with Steam. And I personally love having that overlay up just to see how this thing's performing. Really not that bad. Like I mentioned, you could use the Steam overlay if you want to, but it's just not going to give you this much information. Next on the list, we have Injustice 2, high settings, 1080p, 60 FPS. Looking really good here, and I also tested Street Fighter V totally maxed out at 1080p. No problems. I mean, this does seem to perform really well with fighting games. Now with the newer AAA titles, this is where this older 4th generation i7 CPU is going to struggle a bit. As you can see, we've got some very high CPU usage. And by the way, you can use a controller with these games. I've got an Xbox controller plugged in over USB. We're at 900p original settings, Fidelity FX set to performance, and I was really hoping we could get a steady 60 out of it. I have seen some dips down below 60, so maybe 720p would be the way to go with this. But it's not too bad for the price we paid. I could definitely play this out, and if I wanted to go up to high settings 1080p, I could lock this at 30 from the settings in the game itself and play it all day long. Here's Cyberpunk 2077, 720p, performance settings with Fidelity FX. Really not that bad. I was actually expecting a lot less out of it. You can get this to run at a constant 60 with these settings here. CD Projekt Red has put out a bunch of patches for this game, and the newer patches really do help out with lower end hardware. And the final game we're going to test here is Elden Ring. We're at 900p low settings, and to tell you the truth, going from 720p to 900p really doesn't make a difference on the FPS side of things. I thought we'd get much better out of it, taking that resolution down, but we're still only averaging 40 to 46 FPS, whether it's at 720p or 900p. So yeah, gaming on Linux has definitely come a long way, and with a system like this, you can install any Linux variant you want and get Steam up and running with Proton. You can do the overlays and everything like that. You could go with Ubuntu, you could do something like Pop! OS, but my personal favorite is Manjaro, and that's what I chose to make a tutorial on. The system we put together today isn't a super high-end AAA gaming monster, but for the price and the time we're in right now, I don't think it's that bad. And if you didn't want to install Linux, you could always go with Windows. But there's been a lot of people, a lot of my viewers have been asking to do kind of a Linux install video, so there it is. If you're interested in putting something like this together, I will leave a few links in the description. The Optiplex and the video card I picked up secondhand on eBay, obviously, but you can always check your local Craigslist and all those OfferUp apps. It's really up to you. But that's going to wrap it up for this one. I really appreciate you watching. I will have a few more advanced tutorials coming up, like applications that allow you to overclock your CPU and GPU in Linux without having to hit up the BIOS. Now with an older Optiplex machine like this, we won't be able to overclock the CPU, but on the GPU side of things, we can get everything taken care of. And if there's anything else you want to see running on this machine in Linux, just let me know in the comments below. But like always, thanks for watching.